I want to play for the audience, though, so that they're clear on what we're talking about, a piece of propaganda, because I don't know what else you call this. This is sort of supposed to be a video about who they are and how they introduce themselves to the world, but it's straight up propaganda. So let's go ahead and play that. This is Center for New American Security.
CNAS is where you come for bold policy recommendations that are also grounded in reality. There is a demand for ideas and for fresh thinking in the national security space, and that is what we are here to provide.
CNAS is shaping the national conversation on national security in a bipartisan manner.
Not just Republicans and Democrats working near each other, but actually working together.
We're always committed to having real-time policy impact.
Let's bring in Andrea at the National Intelligence Council. Joining me now,
Elon Goldenberg,
Senior Fellow at the Center for
a New American Security.
2019 has been a pretty exceptional year for the organization.
One of the things I'm really proud of in 2019 is the engagement with policymakers, particularly those on Capitol Hill.
I'm grateful for this opportunity to be here today to speak to China's expanding influence in the Indo-Pacific.
One of the most important things that we'll be doing in this next year ahead of the 2020 election is the U.S.-China relationship. We think of that as the China challenge.
CNAS got chosen to write this congressionally mandated study of the Indo-Pacific because of the strength of our team.
CNAS works across a wide array of regions.
The Middle East,
nations like China,
Europe, defense,
and energy and technology.
We look at veterans' issues through a national security lens.
One of my friends, who is a fellow veteran, told me that he went on our Veteran Benefit Finder and found out that he doesn't have to pay property tax, and it's going to save his family hundreds of dollars every single month.
We move quickly, and that means that we can follow the most important issue at hand.
But I also think about our work here as building intellectual capital for the future.
The CNAS is a very different kind of organization, and that is 100% committed to giving young people a seat at the table.
The incredible talent that is here at CNAS are committed to the hard problems that face the country as we move into 2020 and beyond.
Because we are aimed at this ambitious but very valuable goal, creating a country and a world that is safer, more prosperous, and freer.
Okay, so now you folks can see what I'm talking about. Here you saw a video in which you had bipartisan support. So you had politicians from the Republican Party, politicians from the Democratic Party on the stage together, including Elizabeth Warren, who's supposed to be a progressive fighter. So Flournoy was on Biden's short list to be Secretary of Defense. She didn't get appointed. A guy named Lloyd Austin was appointed instead. He's with Raytheon on the board. But what have you uncovered about Flournoy? Because she seems to be somebody that floats between these think tanks. She's involved in the revolving door between working for the government and then going back out and working for the military-industrial complex. What's her story?
Well, she remained, I think, relatively obscure until maybe the middle part of the Obama administration. And that's when it became very clear that she was one of the biggest sort of envoys between the Obama administration and the think tank circuit. Mm-hmm. Now, around that same time, I'm talking about, I don't know, I want to say like late 2015 to 2014, she co-founded the CNAS. And the CNAS, one of the biggest deals about it is it seemed to be sort of this, they made a big show out of being not just bipartisan, but actually bringing together some of these Obama officials together with Bush-era neocons specifically. Yeah. And one of the main ones was Eric Edelman. And Eric Edelman was the U.S. ambassador to Turkey. He was one of Dick Cheney's key national security advisors. He helped cook up the false cherry-picked intelligence on Iraq. So that just in and of itself, the sort of the founding of the think tank, presenting it as this sort of union between the Obama and Bush era of foreign policy thinkers, right, was a sort of, I believe, sort of meant to be, to send a sign to the rest of DC that this is sort of okay now. This is sort of the new way. We're sort of moving forward on this sort of bringing, the neocons and the liberals together sort of thing. And we saw, of course, that manifest in the election when the neocons from the Bush era were advising Hillary Clinton. But Michelle Flournoy, I mean, she also has a history in the Council on Foreign Relations. She also goes back to CSIS. She was pretty much behind, or encouraging of all the, worst Obama era foreign policy stuff. So when it comes to, Libya, Ukraine, Syria, everything bad, she was one of the loudest voices internally, apparently, pushing for this. Now, from what I've heard, she was sort of frozen out a little bit in the last year of the Obama administration. So I'm not sure, I don't know how she's going to appear back in this administration. And I'm also kind of thinking, were they sort of going for an optical woke kind of for defense secretary? Because it seemed like basically their picks were between a woman and a black guy, and they ended up going for the black guy who was the Raytheon board member, as you already mentioned. So I don't know if that was what the decision-making process came down to, but it was sort of a big deal. A month and a half ago, it was sort of like, oh my God, it's going to be the first woman Secretary of Defense. How exciting this is. And you really couldn't make a worse pick besides her or Victoria Nuland, who I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit.
In fact, let's talk about Victoria Nuland, because she also used to work at Center for New American Security, and now she was the ex-CEO, I believe. She's now an appointee in the State Department.
Yes, and she actually has a higher position in the State Department than she had before, which is pretty alarming. I mean, the position she has now is called Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. When she was in the Obama administration, she was started as a State Department spokesperson, kind of like in the same way Jen Psaki was at some point in the Obama administration. And then she eventually graduated to what ended up being one of the most key positions possible during that point in the Obama administration, which was Assistant Secretary of State for Eurasian Affairs. And I don't know exactly how it happened, but from my research, it appears that Obama and people who surrounded him sort of deferred a lot of this policy in terms of our engagement with the Ukraine situation to Victoria Nuland. And of course, for people who don't already know, she was infamously recorded on a leaked phone call discussing who she wanted to put in the new Ukrainian government before the current government had even fallen. And she was discussing this with Jeffrey Pyatt, who was the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. And so a lot of people, rightfully so, have placed the blame on sort of the Ukraine coup on Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt. Now, there's definitely other people involved in that. Biden actually played a role in that as well. And, it's like, how did Hunter Biden get that gas gig? Well, probably, because of came out of this situation. So that's very troubling. And what I'm mostly worried about, Tina, is that Obama, for all his faults, actually did put some pushback against the sort of Victoria Nuland schema towards the end of his administration. I don't see Biden even remotely having the wherewithal to do anything like that. So that's sort of what we're up against. Is I think that Biden is just going to be sort of just this robotic puppet in a lot of ways for some of the most vicious foreign policy things that didn't get a chance to fully materialize during the Obama era.
No, and I don't disagree with that. I feel like maybe we should have a little bit of a conversation about what neoconservative values are. Sure. And for folks that aren't clear on that, neoconservative, neoliberal, they stem from the same philosophical roots, right? So this is Hayek principles, a guy named Hayek, for the philosopher geeks out there. But basically the thing that they're arguing at base is that the market is the moral arbiter, right? The market, the free market is the moral arbiter. And almost all of their robust foreign policy is pretty much based on making the world safe for American business interests, right? For the free market. So when you have both parties embracing sort of a form of this, and really I think the only reason they started using these different terms, neoliberal, neoconservative, was to try to sell it to their bases. The same stuff, right? We're just going to brand it slightly differently, and that way the base won't understand the problem and maybe they'll be okay with it. But we're in a deep problem now, because I feel, here we are, we're entering 2021, couldn't get it out. And it's as if Eisenhower was predicting this all those years ago when he said the military-industrial complex would be the biggest problem we faced in the future, that it would become something in and of itself that would not be controllable. And I think we're definitely there. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've been there as long as I've probably been alive.
Yeah, true.
I was born in the early 80s. So, I mean, ever since, every presidential administration has been largely dictated by these forces. But I think something interesting happened, during the Trump era. The last 4 years sort of, there was actually a lot of articles and op-eds sort of coming out before Trump got in saying that this was going to be the death of think tanks. And it was because their sort of position on that was that Trump was pulling away from our quote unquote international obligations, right?
More isolationist.
Sure, yeah. And there's a whole interesting framework that goes into that because, and then suddenly after that, we see Russiagate. We see all this paranoia about how Russia's meddling in our election, how they're going to, they're trying to divide us, and how we're just this weak country that can't stop all this Russian meddling, and we're just so vulnerable to it. That mindset, I think, was an artificial one, constructed largely, I think, not just by the national security state, but also these think tanks, sort of reset things in the sense that right before Trump, the mindset from all these think tanks was there was a consensus, and it was not just that we need to have the free markets dictate things and keep capital flowing. It was also we need to symbolically maintain America's sort of hegemonic standing in the world and make sure that America is still this bulwark for, evil, Hitler, a new Hitler. You hear Robert Kagan talk, one of the most influential of these think tankers, and he makes it all sound like America needs to be this big and scary and all over the world because there's going to be a new Hitler at some point. There's going to be a new crazy dictator that's going to try to take over the world, and America's and NATO and all our allies are the only ones that can stop it. Now that mindset, I think, got sort of reset. That was no longer a popular, they couldn't sell that belief as much to the American public, I guess what I'm saying. And so they sort of changed things around. And I think their mindset now is sort of like America's weak and we're losing. And we need to reassert our foreign policy dominance because if we don't, China and Russia are going to win. And that's a change from the way they talked 4 years ago. It was more like America's still really strong and we just need to prevent. Now it's more like a sort of a fear-mongering framework where it's like, no, they're going to take over.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.